Hi everyone and welcome back to Rachel's Enchanting Cakes. For today's tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to make the ultimate princess castle cake using one inexpensive piece of equipment, the Wilton turret cake set. All these turrets have been decorated on a separate tutorial. I use a simple paneling technique, so if you are a mom wanting to keep the costs down this year and make your own special cake, you do not need to be great with fondant. I keep this super easy. This tutorial is a focus on making and stacking the cake, doweling it, and then simply applying all of the turrets and constructing this beautiful castle. Let's make a start. I start by placing a 10-inch square vanilla sponge cake onto some cake card and a cake board. I then add a thin layer of buttercream before placing a well on the outside. The well will hold in the jam. Now I'm not using too much jam. You can use as much as you want. This was just for a tutorial. I then simply go over the top of the jam with another layer of buttercream and smooth this out. You want to repeat this for each layer of cake, and remember you can use any sized cake that you want to. I then simply repeat that process with 2 more layers of cake. Now there's 2 lots of filling in this, and in total I ended up with 3 layers of a 10-inch cake. So just put your well on the outside, fill with jam, then you want to add another layer of jam directly on top. The reason you add a small amount of buttercream just before you add the first layer of jam is to prevent the jam from soaking into the sponge. Once you have done this, you then want to what's called crumb coat the cake. It's just where you put loads of buttercream all on the top and on the sides. Take your time with this, and this will just give the fondant something to stick to. Remember, we're going to be keeping this super simple. Now you do need to plan your cake in advance, so make the turrets and then figure out where things are going to go. So this is the finished crumb coated cake. I do keep mine in a fridge, and I plan on placing the smallest turret on either side of the door. But if I made that cake too high, as you can see, the turret would hit it, and we're not going to then be able to glue the turret directly to the cake. So I measured mine first. So this cake has ended up at roughly 12.5 centimeters deep. And you need to keep that in mind as a guide, especially if you're using the smallest turret. This smaller turret, roughly, if you measure it from the base to just before where it starts to stick out, is about 12 centimeters. So just keep that in mind with how you design your cake. I then repeated that process with a 6-inch square cake. It's ended up 12.5 centimeters deep, roughly. And again, this is also on a cake card. This is extremely important for when we dowel the cake a little later on. Cover this with some buttercream. This is your crumb coat, and then place it directly into the fridge. Your cake will not go dry whilst it's stored in the fridge as long as all of the cake, the top and the sides, are completely covered with buttercream. This just protects it from the air. We are now going to make a start on that stunning brick effect. So there are 3 different ways to cover the cake. The first one is a paneling technique. You will see this in more detail in the turret tutorial already available. Here I have an impression mat. I have rolled out a small piece of fondant. You simply place it directly on top, go over with a rolling pin on both sides, peel away the mat, and there you have your brick effect. You would then cut this out into a simple square, place it directly onto your buttercream, and add another square next to it. You could then use a cocktail stick just to blend this together. So you don't have to be excellent with fondant, and the mat's doing all of the work for you. Okay, so again, you don't need a mat. I'm keeping things simple. Instead, if you wanted to choose to cover your cake this way, you would roll out some fondant to the size of the side of the cake, cut off the excess once you've applied it directly on there, and then just use a cocktail stick. Now I'm just rushing here. You would do yours in a lot more detail. Yes, it will take longer, but it's just a way that you can cover castle cakes without needing all of these different pieces of equipment, especially if you're only going to do it once. I'm now going to show you, if you are comfortable working with fondant, how you can cover it all in one go. Okay, so for a 10-inch square cake that's roughly 12 centimeters tall, you are going to need 1.7 kilogram of fondant. Roll this out. Now I'm choosing to roll mine in between spaces. I want it to be fairly deep. It's 5 millimeters deep, so that I can get that brick effect without risking any of the buttercream from coming through. Whilst you're rolling this out, you'll notice on this footage I'm doing my best to keep it in a square shape. This will make it so much easier when you apply it directly to the cake. When you do get round to placing this onto the cake, take your time, but you want to get rid of those heavy parts down side of each of the corners. This is where the fondant could potentially tear. So you'll notice I'm using a knife. I'm cutting those parts off, and then you just want to use your smoothers and go around this. This doesn't have to be perfect. It's going to have that beautiful brick effect on, which I'm going to do now. So whilst my fondant is soft, I simply take my impression mat, I use my fingers and I just push it into the fondant and go around all of the sides of the cake. Now, if you are comfortable covering a cake with fondant, but you don't want to invest in one of these mats, again, you could use a cocktail stick. It's just going to take you that little bit longer. Once I've covered the whole cake with this effect, I then place it in the fridge. This will prevent damage to the cake when I pick this up and place it onto the decorated cake drum. So here I'm using the Turret and Stone mould by Dawn Butler from Dinky Doodle. These are available on her website. Again, you don't need one of these. You could use a very sharp knife and just cut out the basic castle like, just that you can see at the top here, to place directly on top, but it would take longer. If you are using one, sprinkle it with some icing sugar. I'm only using fondant here. If you're using a pliable fondant, this is actually from Sweet Success and it's not very expensive, but it's lovely and stretchy, and it also works lovely in mould. Simply push it in and then you just cut off the excess, take them out of the mould, and I'm also using the brick mould as well, just to add a little bit more detail. We're then going to place this directly on the cake, as you can see me do here, with a small amount of edible glue. Here I add the dough. That's going to be a separate tutorial to keep this one as short as possible. And then if you've got some edible dusts, I use a simple grey and a luster dust. Starting with the grey just helps that cake pop out a little bit more, so you can give those bricks a darker colour, and then with the luster dust, that's what gives it a completely edible sparkle. Just look at that, you can see it come to life. Both cakes have been stored in the fridge. This helps prevent damage and it helps you move the cake. I have covered a 16-inch square cake drum. I simply peel away the baking paper and then place this castle cake directly onto this square indentation that I have already placed on there, just to make it easier to line it up. To dowel the cake, I started by placing an indentation on top so I knew where the cake was going to go. I'm using large poly dowels. You push it in, mark it with a pencil and simply cut it down. Repeat this for the centre and all four corners before adding a layer of buttercream so it can act like a natural glue. I then place the 6-inch square cake directly on top. Again, this has been refrigerated. Now for all those gorgeous turrets, the roof and the windows, there's even a door in the set. I am using this Wilton castle cake turret set. There is a separate tutorial on how to decorate these already available on the channel. Now it's time for the fun part. This is where the cake just all comes together. I start by placing the turrets on the cake where I actually want them. So I'm not actually sticking them down at this point. This is just to give me an idea. The only place I'm not going to place them on right now is directly on top of the cake. I will explain about that later. So place them on your base tier and your second tier, just so you know where we're going to be sticking them into place. Now I have a piping bag of some melted white chocolate, and I have coloured this with a small amount of luster dust, or should I not say luster dust, edible dust if you like. I just added a small amount of black. It turns the chocolate into grey so it blends in a bit better, and then you simply place it where it needs to be on the sides of the cake, but also the base. That's very important, and just allow the chocolate to set. Repeat this for all of the turrets and the roof. So now I need the roof of the turrets to go on, but I also need them to be secure. So again, I'm adding some melted chocolate, but this time, unfortunately, I didn't catch it on camera here. I'm sorry about that, but you will see it in just a moment. You add it to the inside of the actual roof part. There you go. You can see the grey chocolate. And then place it directly on top, and that chocolate's just going to move its way directly down to the base, and once it's set, it will be stuck into place with a completely edible medium. Simply repeat this process for all of the roofs on the castle. I then add another window directly to this part of the roof, just with some edible glue. I show you how to make these in the other tutorial. Now for the last 3 turrets that you place on top, you have 2 options. The first one, if you are making it for a customer and you deliver your cakes, you place them on top with a small amount of chocolate once at the venue. But once they are on top, the cake obviously cannot be moved. Finally, the other option, you don't need to use chocolate. As long as that top layer of fondant is completely level, they will stay in place, and you can give them directly to the customer and they can place them on themselves, a bit like you would a candle. That's all you need to do, and it really is as simple as that. Happy baking, everyone. I really do hope I've helped you again today, and I'll be back soon.